Bueno, esan bezala gaurkoa nazioarteko hizkuntza politikari buruzko bosgarren saioa da, azkenekoa. Aurreko asteetan nazioarteko beste kasu batzuei erreparatu diegu, hasi ginen Estoniako kasuarekin, gero Katalunia, Quebec, aurreko astean Alan uharteak eta gaurkoan Flandriako kasuari erreparatuko diogu. Bueno, hola, labur-labur aurkezteko, gaur gurean izango ditugun hizlariak, alde batetik daukagu Flandriatik Wilfried Vandaele, bera Flandriako politikaria da eta Aliantza Flandriar berrian afiliatuta dago. 2009tik Flandriako parlamentuko kidea da eta bozeramaile gisa aritu da 2019tik urte horretan zehar. Eta gaur egun bere jaioterriko alkatea da. Eta bestalde gurean daukagu Aizpea Abrisketa, bera arituko da gaur errelatore lanetan. Bera urruñarra da eta euskal ikasketak egin zituen Baionako unibertsitatean. Eta EHUko historia sailean egin du bere doktorego tesia. Eta orain arte kontseiluko langilea ere izan da. Bueno, nahi dezuenean Wilfried, hasi zaitezke aurkezpenarekin.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. I am Wilfried Vandaele, and I am a member of Flemish Parliament. In fact, I am the leader of the new Flemish Alliance, NVA, in our Flemish Parliament, NVA being a Flemish nationalist party. And in fact, it's the largest group in our parliament for the moment, because we have elections coming on in June next year. For the moment, we are the largest group. Before I became a full-time politician, I had a real job. I used to be the Secretary General of the Cultural Treaty between Flanders and the Netherlands. So this can also come in handy when we talk about language politics, linguistic politics. So thank you for inviting me today. Your struggle for cultural and linguistic rights resembles the struggle of Flanders in Belgium. Here you see Belgium with Flanders in red, Wallonia in green, and Brussels in blue. Flanders is Dutch speaking, Wallonia is French speaking, and Brussels is bilingual, so French and Dutch. But as you see, Brussels is surrounded by Flemish area, by Dutch speaking area. Our mother tongue, in fact, is Dutch. It's the official language of the Netherlands, of course, but also of Flanders. At home, we speak Flemish, which is a system of dialects. The Flemish are in the majority in Belgium. Belgium was founded in 1830, but only in 1930, 100 years later, a university was allowed to give courses in Dutch. It was the University of Ghent. We have three official languages in Belgium. We have Dutch, we have French, and we also have German. Just a small part of Belgium speaks German. Flanders has 6.7 million inhabitants. The Netherlands have 17.5. So in total, there are 24 million people speaking Dutch. It's also an official language in the European Union. We have, for the moment, 24 official languages in Europe, and Dutch is, let's say, the 8th language. Yeah. So here we see all the official languages in Europe. Yeah, we see a map of the Netherlands here. So you have Flanders and you have the Netherlands. We have a Taalunie between Flanders and the Netherlands, which is a union for the Dutch language. The Taalunie develops and promotes policy on Dutch in the Netherlands and in Flanders. also in Suriname, former Dutch colony. And it also strengthens the position of Dutch abroad. The language union was founded by a treaty, an international treaty, between Belgium and the Netherlands in 1980. And there is also cooperation with the former Dutch colonies, also cooperation with South Africa. And this construction, this language union, is in fact unique in the world. The French don't have it, the English don't have it, Dutch do have it. We have an institution with a council for the Dutch language and for Dutch literature. It's an advisory council. There is a committee of ministers. Ministers are the decision makers, of course. There is a secretariat, and there is also a commission of Dutch and Flemish members of parliament to supervise the language treaty. I am, for the moment, the chairman of this interparliamentary commission. There are in the world 131 universities and institutions for higher education where you can study Dutch in 39 countries. It's about 15,000 students. As I said, Belgium was founded in 1830, and although a majority of Belgians was Flemish and spoke Dutch or a Flemish dialect, in practice, the official language then was French. The upper class used French. The courts, education, public administration were French, and people who wanted to succeed in life, they had to use French. Brussels is a good example. It used to be historically a Flemish city, but today it is a mainly French-speaking city. But, as I told you in the beginning, surrounded by Flemish territory. Since 1860, around and about 1860, Flemish people demanded language rights because there were some really unacceptable things going on. Children at school, for instance, were not allowed to speak Dutch, not even on the playgrounds. They were punished. If they spoke Flemish or Dutch, they had to clean their mouths with soap. Moreover, some people were sentenced even to death without being able to understand what had been said in the court. 100 years later, in 1962, the language border was established. In Belgium, we have 4 language zones. The Dutch zone, which is Flanders, French zone, Wallonia, German zone, very small, and then the bilingual area, French and Dutch, Brussels. Here we see these zones. Here we see them again. So you have the Dutch, you have the French, then you have Brussels bilingual, and you have a small part German speaking. The fact that we established language zones with language borders means that we choose for the principle of territoriality with location-related language rights. We did not choose for the personality principle with person-related language rights. In Latin, it's the jus solis versus jus personae. Personality principle means that a person has rights and takes these with him wherever he goes. In that case, as far as language is concerned, public authorities have to adapt to the individual. The principle of territoriality gives rights to the region, so individuals have to adapt to the language of the region. In my opinion, the principle of territoriality is the only system that can work in the public area. And all states that are organized in a federal way use this principle. The European Court for Human Rights says that this principle indeed is not discriminating. A region, a society has certain rules, has a certain language, and it is a good thing for individuals to use that language when they want to be part of this society. At home, in private, people can speak whatever they like, of course, but when citizens and authorities communicate, there are linguistic rules, and that's a good thing for society that in public people use the language of the area. So in Flanders, it's Dutch. We need a language breathing space, a cultural space, because it makes us feel at home, it makes us feel safe amongst people we can understand. There is a social cohesion, there is solidarity, etc. All elements that are very important to construct a solid society. The existence of different linguistic and cultural varieties in Europe gives us a richness, a colorful diversity that should be typical for Europe, as opposed to, for instance, the United States, which is a melting pot. Europe hasn't always been clear on that matter. There has always been a friction between the economic objectives and the cultural objectives. On one hand, nothing must prevent free trade and free traffic of services, goods, and people. On the other hand, cultural and thus linguistic variety is important for Europe. This principle was adopted in the Treaty of Maastricht. The cultural paragraph gave countries the possibility to protect and to stimulate their cultural identity. I was at that time one of the co-authors of this paragraph, and also the educational paragraph stressed the importance of the different languages. The treaties of Amsterdam and Lisbon that followed confirmed the principle that the Union should respect the cultural and linguistic diversity. So European countries are allowed to subsidize their films, their books, TV programs, works of art, theaters, etc., even if this inhibits, to a certain extent, free trade in the sense that it could be a distortion of competition. Internationally, there are quite some instruments, not only to protect different languages as such, but also to protect smaller languages or languages that are only used in certain regions. You see some of these instruments here. The last one is the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, that implies certain rights of minorities for minorities in the field of culture, education, radio, television, and language. Belgium signed this convention in 2001, but the Flemish region never signed it. Flemish or Flanders refuses to sign it because it fears that signing this treaty would endanger this principle of territoriality with language zones and borders, on which the federal state of Belgium is in fact founded. And the problem in Belgium is that French are very imperialistic. They are not really good neighbors because they constantly want to move the fence. A good neighbor doesn't do that. Next time you know, the neighbor is sleeping in your bed with your wife, so be careful. But for the Basque country, I think this framework is a good thing, because Spain already signed it in 1995, and it concerns the protection of minorities. But we in Flanders, we didn't sign it. Now let us say something about language used as an instrument, let's say to organize society. In job advertisements, for instance, language is a relevant criterion. Language is not the same as race or as an ethnic background. You can learn a language. So we mustn't make mistakes there. The Flemish and Belgian laws state that one mustn't discriminate on the basis of language, but one can use language as a criterion if one can motivate. Sometimes this is not easy. but that's what we do. We motivate while we want the Dutch language to be used in certain circumstances. Flanders uses the condition of knowing Dutch as a criterion to augment the chance of finding a job, for instance, as a criterion to integrate in a community and to keep certain areas livable. So our motives to ask that people know Dutch are not merely cultural or linguistic, but also social. Again, if people can communicate with each other and understand each other, people feel safer, solidarity grows, you have a solid society. After a struggle of many decennia, today in Flanders, Dutch must be used by the public administration, by the courts, in education, and in enterprises. Some instruments involving language criteria Flanders uses have been taken to Belgian courts, to international committees, or to the European Court, mainly by the French in Belgium. So let us have a look at some fields in which Dutch has to be used today. Courts, education, companies, public administration, housing, social housing, and minimum living wages financial support. Courts in Flanders have to use the Dutch language. In Brussels, it should be Dutch or French. And if people, for instance, foreigners, do not understand the language, they can ask for an interpreter. Education in kindergarten, in primary and secondary education, Dutch must be used. There are a few exceptions. The exception, for instance, is that some schools teach partly in the language of immigrants in order to stimulate their integration. An exception is also that there are experiments with immersion education, but the rule is that it should be Dutch. Also, universities and institutions for higher education have to use Dutch. But in higher education, more and more courses are taught in English. They say to attract more foreign students and to give Flemish students more opportunities on the international market. I don't always agree, but that's what they say. In the Netherlands, so I'm talking about Flanders, but in the Netherlands, some universities nowadays use only English, no longer Dutch. In Flanders, this is still impossible today. Flemish universities are allowed to have 9% of the bachelor courses in another language, which is English mainly. In the masters, they can have 35% of the courses in other languages. But so difference with the Netherlands is a serious difference. There they can teach in English 100%. Here it's 9% or 35 maximum. But in practice, we see also in Flanders that these regulations are becoming less and less strict, and Dutch loses ground, English wins. Enterprises in Flanders have to use Dutch in all spoken or written communication with employees and in all official documents. In Brussels, companies have to make documents in Dutch for their Flemish employees and in French for their French-speaking employees. But also here in reality, because we also have a lot of international companies and enterprises, in reality, they often use English. As far as the law is concerned, which obliges companies to use Dutch in Flanders, well, here the European Court said that this law obstructs the free traffic of people and services. So, according to the European Court, the solution is to make two versions of a text, one in Dutch and one in another language. Public administration. In Flanders, the government, provinces, municipalities communicate with their citizens in Dutch. That's the rule, that's the law. This is also the case for semi-public authorities, for instance, public transport, buses, trains, and for companies working for public authorities. In principle, people also have to use Dutch in their contacts with the authorities. For instance, if they want a construction permit, they ask for a construction permit, they have to ask it in Dutch. But in practice, Flemish people are often very tolerant and they adapt to others. If useful, they easily switch to another language. If they hear people that don't speak Dutch, they simply switch to French or English. We see it as a matter of courtesy. Brussels is, of course, a different situation. It's the bilingual capital of Belgium. It's also the capital of Flanders. But as I said, it's surrounded by Flemish municipalities. In Brussels, both Dutch and French are official languages. And in fact, civil servants, but also doctors, nurses in hospitals, etc., they should know both languages. In reality, they don't. They often only know French. Some say this is logic, as the Dutch-speaking people in Brussels are a minority these days. But this is not really correct. First of all, Brussels used to be a Flemish city that became French artificially. And second, Flemings have the majority in Belgium, but let's say on the road to self-government, we aren't there yet, but still, on the road to self-government, they gave up this majority in Belgium. So there are a lot of mechanisms within the Belgian government, within Belgian parliament, to make it impossible that the Flemish majority would impose its will on the French minority. So the Flemish gave up this majority in the Belgian institutions on condition that, as a compensation, they would not be discriminated in Brussels. So that's also why Brussels for us is really a symbol, and we want the position of Dutch in Brussels also to be firm. The French domination in Brussels also affects the communities, the Flemish communities surrounding Brussels, because more and more French-speaking people also have a lot of international institutions in Brussels. And more French-speaking people, also English-speaking people, come and live in the nice, green, calm, safe Flemish municipalities surrounding Brussels. In some of these municipalities, the French-speaking people obtained special language rights. They are allowed to demand, for instance, official documents or primary education for their children in French in these Flemish municipalities. And the pressure of the French on the Flemish communities goes on and on. In some Flemish municipalities, see here Brussels in blue, and then the Flemish municipalities surrounding Brussels. There you have some municipalities with a majority of French speaking people in the red, or more than 30%, more than 20% French speaking. Some of these municipalities have special language rights for French, and we call them municipalities with language facilities. But as I said, the danger is that the French always want to move the fence. So this is a problem. For example, when there are elections, French-speaking people in these Flemish communities are allowed to ask for election documents in French. Normally, they receive the documents in Dutch, and then if you are French-speaking, you can ask a French version. But the French want, in fact, that if they have asked it once, they should receive it in French for the rest of their lives. But the court there says that this is not what we have to do. We send them in Dutch, and they have to ask for a French version each time, again and again. There are also mayors in these Flemish municipalities, mayors who refuse to speak Dutch. And there, our Flemish government, which is responsible for the appointing these mayors, well, Flemish government refuses to appoint them if they refuse to speak Dutch. There are a lot of procedures going on in court, etc. The Council of Europe, for instance, does not agree with Flanders, but still we demand that these mayors speak Dutch, use Dutch if they are a mayor in a Flemish municipality. Here we see again the communities with language facilities, green communities. You see the white Brussels with some communities in green around it with language facilities. Also on the border with Wallonia, you have some municipalities with language facilities. Housing. As far as housing is concerned, Flanders asks that immigrants learn Dutch if they want to rent a social house. That way they can understand what is written in the contract, rights and obligations. They can understand safety rules in the building. They can communicate with their neighbors. They can communicate with the authorities. So for social houses, we ask that people learn Dutch. And there are also courses that they can have. The government of the French community in Belgium and the League for Human Rights, they both turned to the Constitutional Court in Belgium and opposed the law. But the Belgian Constitutional Court and the State Council earlier said that this law was okay. Only the Committee Against Racial Discrimination of the United Nations says, no, this is not okay. You cannot do that. But this Committee of the United Nations cannot condemn. They can only express their concern. But so there are no legal consequences, and we leave the law as it is. Some municipalities go further, and they ask people, for instance, to learn the language, to learn Dutch, if they want to buy a house or a building plot. This goes a bit too far, but we ask people to learn the language. We do not have an examination. So if you had an examination, this would clearly be felt to be a discrimination. But to ask them to learn it is not a discrimination. Yeah. People that come and live here and they want to obtain a financial support from the municipality, minimum living wages, these people too are asked to learn the language, to learn Dutch. And the Flemish government organizes courses for these people. Again, we ask them to learn Dutch. We do not have examination. We do that because, of course, we want these people to find a job and to be able to sustain themselves, to support themselves. So knowing the language is important to find a job and to live here. There are also other fields where they have tried to to ask people to learn Dutch or to know Dutch, for instance, for after-school childcare. Some municipalities demanded that the knowledge of Dutch was important to send your child to after-school childcare. There, the Flemish minister annulled this rule, said no, this goes too far. Also, a few municipalities, a few communities adopted the rule that people selling things on markets mustn't use other languages but Dutch, only Dutch. This too, well, the Flemish minister said this goes too far, so they annulled this rule. There are also examples in the Netherlands, some funny examples. For instance, in the Netherlands, there was an example of a girl that wanted to become a hairdresser, and she brought her mother as a model for her exam, for her haircut exam. The mother only spoke Spanish, or Basque, no Spanish. And the school refused that because it said that the way the student communicates and interacts with the client is important. It's an important part of the examination. So the fact that she brought her mother and the mother only spoke Spanish was a reason for the school to send away the student. And the Dutch Commission of Equal Treatment decided that the school was indeed right to do that. Another example in the Netherlands was the Dutch Society of Acupuncturists. Funny examples, but why not? That society demanded that its members know Dutch. And there too, the Commission of Equal Treatment thought that this was a reasonable demand because it was important for the quality of their services that acupuncturists understand the information the organization provides. And also, not only in the Netherlands, but also in the United States and in other countries, you have these rules that, as you had other seminars on that theme, I'm sure that our colleagues gave other examples. In Quebec, for instance, in Canada, there are a lot of examples. Conclusion: in Belgium and in Flanders, the last 150 years, we have voted rules and laws in order to give the Dutch language, being the language of the Flemish, the majority of the people in Belgium. We wanted to give that language the same rights as the French language, being the language of a minority in Belgium. So in Belgium, the majority was protected with instruments that are normally used to protect a minority, as it is in Basque Country. We choose for the principle of territoriality with language zones and borders, and the language used in the Flemish territory by the administration, by the courts, in education, in companies is Dutch. Recently, in the years 2000, Flanders also adopted laws to ask that immigrants learn Dutch if they want to receive minimum wages or if they want to hire a social house, a cheap house. This is a commitment. There are no examinations. We see it as a means of strengthening social cohesion, in which language is indeed important. The process of internationalization, accompanied by large-scale migration, puts a high pressure on the concept of having homogeneous language zones. Measures taken in favor of the mother tongue in a certain region are easily qualified by some as being old-fashioned or even as being discriminating. We don't agree. But that way, many of our measures protecting or stimulating our language breathing space are contested in courts, in international committees, both nationally and internationally. People try to abolish these laws. Sometimes our laws or measures survive, sometimes they don't. It is important that the condition to use a language does not imply a discrimination on the basis of race or ethnic elements, of course. That's for sure. The easiest way would perhaps be to give in and to let things take their course. And the result could be, or the result will be, that the strongest survives and that our smaller languages and cultures disappear. That's not what we want. As for me, I'm convinced that taking action in favor of our language, in favor of our culture, remains necessary, and safeguarding our language, be it Dutch, be it Basque, is, I think, our contribution to, let's say, a colorful and interesting Europe. So that was my my story, but of course, if there are questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. Are there questions, and how can we hear them? I'll choose the English channel. Yes, I see a hand. Carmelo.
Ez zaizu entzuten, Carmelo?
Bai, orain.
Orain bai.
Eskerrik asko, Vandaele jauna, mila esker. Ni bizi izan naiz urte batzuetan Flandrian, tokatu zai bereziki Bruselan bizi izatea, baina bizitatu ditut Flandriako hainbat toki, Europako Parlamentuko parlamentaria izan nintzen, eta tokatu zitzaidan da beti mirestu izan dut Flandriak Nederlanderarekin lortu duen berreskuratzea, hizkuntzaren berreskuratzea. Da beti iruditu zait eredu bat zela euskaldunontzat. Euskaldunok badaramagu urte pila bat egoera elebidun honetan, baina ez dugu lortzen aurrera egitea. Hezkuntzan ikasten irakasten dugun irakasle izan naiz unibertsitatean urte luzeetan, baina orain tamalez ikusi egiten dut unibertsitatean ere Euskal Adarretako ikasleek beraien artean gaztelera erabiltzen dutela eta euskara atzeraka doala. Orduan nire galdera da, laburtuko zenituzke mesedez zeintzu diren zure ustez baldintza minimoak, gutxienezko baldintzak euskara bezalako egoera batean hizkuntzak aurrera egin dezan. Zuk aipatu duzu lurraldetasuna. Hori uste du nik Flandrian izan dela baldintza ezinbesteko bat. Baina horretaz aparte guk ditugu arazo larriak epaileekin, justizia sistemarekin, komunikabideekin. ETB hasi zen euskararen alde eta gaur egun ETBek batez ere gaztelera bultzatzen du. Ni sarritan egon naiz, gaur ere egon naiz programa batean ETBen euskaraz, baina gaztelerazko kanalak hartzen du indar gerota gehiago. Orduan, zeintzuk lirateke zure ustez ezinbesteko baldintzak euskarak aurrera egin dezan. Kontutan harturik, behar bada Euskal Herrian populazioaren gehienak nahi duela berreskuratu, prest dagoela euskara berreskuratzeko, baina ez dugu baldintzarik aurrera egiteko. Eskerrik asko.
Yes, thank you for your question, Carmelo. I am very flattered that you think Flanders to be an example as far as linguistic policy is concerned, and also perhaps as far as walking the road to self-government is concerned. Of course, the situation in your country, in Basque country, is not exactly the same as in Flanders. Also because we are a majority and you are a minority. This is perhaps important. But if you say, what are the conditions? This is a difficult question. I think what we see in Basque country and also here is that people seem to be less interested in the position of this mother tongue, of be it Dutch or be it Basque. They like to use English or they like to use Spanish. They seem less interested than, let's say, 20 years ago. So this is a threat. It's the people themselves that have to be motivated to preserve the language and to and then if you are dedicated to preserve the language, then of course you need the legal framework. And there I am happy that in Flanders we have indeed some legal frameworks dating back to perhaps 20, 30, 50 years ago. These are all elements we are happy that they exist, because I think if we would have to invent them today, it wouldn't work anymore. Mentality of the people has changed. I think if we would like to make the linguistic laws as we have them, if we want to create them today, it would be very difficult. I think young people wouldn't be interested to have language borders and facilities and whatever. So this legal framework is important. I think in Basque country, you also have some legal elements you can use and you should use. But it is, of course, the mentality of the people that has to concern us as well. I saw Joshua.
Thank you. Well, firstly, congratulations on your lecture, Mr. Vandaele. It has been very interesting for us. Thank you.
Aha.
And
one of the 15,000 Dutch-speaking students in the world.
Yeah, I have very, very good Flemish friends. Euskaraz esango dut. Nik Carmelo bezala, uste dut Flandriako eredua, momentu bat, gaizki entzuten dut. Ja. Bai, esaten nintzen, Carmelok bezala, nik ere uste dut Flandriakoa eredu linguistikoa dela guretzako. Eta Txiardegik hori ja irakatsi zigun aspaldian. Baina galdera bat egin nahi dizut. Oker ez baldin banaiz, zure herrian duela 100 urte edo 120 urte, Flandriarrek elebitasunaren aldeko diskursoa egiten zenuten. Garai hartan, frantsesa zen hizkuntza nagusia, Belgika osoan, eta mugimendu flandriarrak elebitasunaren aldeko apostua edo eskaera egiten zuen. Gero, aldiz, jarrera hori aldatu eta nederlanderazko elebakartasunaren aldeko jarrerara pasatu zenuten. Nola sortu zen aldaketa hori, ikuspuntu horren aldaketa, nola gertatu zen eta ze arrazoiak egon ziren aldaketa horretarako? Eskerrik asko, thank you.
Thank you. That's indeed an interesting question. I think at first what we call the Flemish movement indeed would have been very happy if there was a bilingual system. In theory, this can work, but we see that the French are not very friendly. So bilingual means in practice it meant French, because even if it was bilingual, in practice French always dominated, and that's what I think was the reason why at a certain moment they said, well, this will not work. We have to have our own language zone, perhaps with some facilities for minorities in the border zone, but we have to advocate this territorial principle and not bilingualism. So I think you're right that at first people thought that this was going to be the solution, but in practice it didn't work. I think we also have had an evolution through the years, because in Belgium, Flanders is in fact the strongest region, also economically, which of course helps. If I tell you now that 85% of Belgium export is Flemish export, so we are really dominating today, which of course is useful. As I told you in earlier days, if people wanted to be respected, they had to speak French. This was a social issue. Nowadays, this is no longer the case, because the economic strength is Flemish, not French, for the moment. Of course, this can always change, but this is how it is. Also, there's a lot of money, of means going from Flanders to Wallonia, for instance. So the Walloons, they couldn't survive without the support of the Flemish for the moment, because their economy is much weaker. And being economically strong also helps to make your point in the cultural and linguistic field. Are there other questions? Carmelo is waving. Okay.
Bai, mila esker. Niri tokatu zitzaidan batez ere Bruselan egotea bizitzen 6 urtez. Galdera zuzena da, baduzue proiekturik Bruselarako? Iruditzen zait Bruselak daukala estatus oso konplexu bat zuentzat, oso komplikatua. Ez da bakarri Belgika, Europa da, hiriburu Europarra da. Dan ez da bakarri frantsesa entzuten, inglesa gero eta gehiago entzuten da, eta erabili ere bai, adibidez Parlamentu Europarrean lehen frantsesa asko erabiltzen zen barruan, orain batez ere inglesa erabiltzen da, eta Bruselan bertan beraz, Flandriaren ikuspuntutik, Flandria izan da ere, oso komplikatua da, baina zuk orain, aipatu duzun indar ekonomikoa eta finanzieroa oso handia da Bruselan. Zuek baduzue proiekturik abertzale Flandriar bezala Bruselaren estatusa eta egoera aldatzeko, edo ontzat ematen duzue dagoen bezala?
Well, as you say, it's very complex, because of course it's the international capital. So the status of Brussels is very high, but in reality, and you live there, so you know, in reality, Brussels still consists of 19 municipalities with 19 mayors, all very small, and they don't agree, and police and whatever, they have to to organize all this. So this is really very strange. You have the international capital on one side, and on the other side you have this this very weird situation with small communities, small municipalities. In Brussels, that's of course we have. It's nowadays it's an international community. We have French, we have Dutch, but we have all sorts of languages, all sorts of culture. I think the Dutch in Brussels nowadays is about 23%. The French, I don't know, it was somewhere in my presentation, but I won't find it immediately, but perhaps it's 50 or 60%. Or not even that. So it's very complex. If you live in Brussels, you have to choose for the Flemish community or for the French community. So if you go to school, you choose a Dutch school or a French school. And if you ask what does your party want for the future, well, what we would like to do, we want self-government of Flanders, which does not mean that we don't want to be, that we want to leave solidarity. No, we will always be, of course, we always help each other. We help each other in Europe as well. Why wouldn't we do that in Belgium? But we want strict rules, and we want it to be transparent. Also, we know what policy they want to conduct with the means we give them, because there is really a great difference in the way, let's say, Wallonia or Brussels act and the way Flanders act. In Flanders, we want people to work, for instance. We want everybody to have a job to support our social security. In Wallonia, which is a more socialist approach, they think this is less important. So what we would like in the ideal situation is that not only for culture, people in Brussels can choose between the Dutch and the French community, but also for instance, social security, they can choose, and we don't have that. I think in Basque Country you are a bit further than we are in some respects, as far as social security and so on is concerned. Here it is still a Belgian thing, social security. So we would like that to be a thing for the regions, but we are not there yet. But if we were there, then, as far as we are concerned, people in Brussels could choose. They could have the opportunity to choose for one system or another. But this will be very, very difficult to achieve. It will be very, very difficult. But if Brussels didn't exist, I think Flanders and Wallonia would have been apart earlier, because Brussels, no one wants to let go of Brussels. Especially the Flemish don't want to. I explained why, because we gave away our majority in Belgium, and as a compensation, we were told that in Brussels we would have a 50-50, or at least. So we don't want to let that go. For us, it's very symbolic. The capital of Belgium is Brussels. Also, the capital of Flanders is Brussels. The capital of Wallonia is not Brussels. So that's a different approach. Wallonia didn't, the French-speaking part of Belgium did not choose Brussels as being as a capital. The Flemish did. So we don't want to lose Brussels. Other questions? Annie.
Kaixo, ni aizpea brisketa naiz, hemen ani jartzen du, baina akats bat da. Bueno, Eskatu zidaten pixka bat raporteur lana egiteko edo, pixka bat zuk esan duzun guztiaren bildumatxo bat edo egiteko, eta kasua da ere, nik Bruselan ere bizi izan naizela luzaz, Carmelo eta gero, Koldo Gorostiagarekin lan egin nuen bertan, eta bizi izan dut egoera hori Europar hiriburu, Brusela Europar hiriburu izatearen hori, baina ere bai lan egin nuen udaletxe batean, Zergileko udaletxean, eta zuk aipatu dituzun hori komunitate frankofonoa eta komunitate neerlandofonoa elebitasun horren antolaketa Bruselan ere ezagutu izan nuen, eta gainera bizi izan nintzen Linkebeken, beraz, komina facilite horietako batean. Eta ohartzen naizena da, zuk aipatu duzun guztia eta gero, lurraldetasun printzipioari eustearen arrazoiak ulergarriak direla ikusita egiten duzun hizkuntza politika, neerlanderaren aldeko hizkuntza politikak, naiz eta legeak euki, naiz eta lurraldetasun printzipioa euki, beti ere egon behar delako alertan eta babesean, ez? Bruselan teorian guztiak neerlandofono guztiek eskubide berdinak dituzte, frankofonoen eskubide berdinak dituzte, baina praktikan askotan gertatzen da neerlandofonoak joango denean administrazio batera ez zaiola, ez duela aurkituko ere, batzutan neerlandofono bat bere parean. Orduan, borroka etengabea da, aipatzen zenuna, beti aktibo izan beharrekoa, eta gogora ekarri dit, guk lurraldetasuna aipatzen duzuen hori balore bat bezala eta hasieran esan duzu, ez? Zure iritziz bakarrik eredu horrek funtziona dezakela. Eta guk daukagun lurraldetasunarekiko daukagun beste ikuspegi, hizkuntza politiken ikuspegitik, da guk dauzkagula 4 hizkuntza politika Euskal Herri oso batean, Euskal Herri osoan 4 hizkuntza politika, euskarari mesederik egiten ez diotenak, ez? 4 hizkuntza politika desberdinak. Oso kuriosoa da, eta ez da ongi ulertzen, edo ez da ongi zaila da ulertaraztea Euskal Herrian lurraldetasun printzipio hori, horren onurak zeintzuk izan daitezken. Eta aldi berean ere, igual Bruselaren eredua izango litzateke guk gehiago edukiko genukena, baina aldi berean ere, Bruselak frogatzen du elebitasuna ez duela funtzionatzen, ez? Eta askotan hemen badago urriente bat ni iparraldekoa naiz, ipar Euskal Herrikoa naiz, beraz hemen ez daukagu inolako ezagutzarik, euskarak ez dauka inolako ezagutzarik, eta frantsesa dugu nagusi, ez? Orduan, frantses politikak, frantses hizkuntzaren politika ezberdinak, izan dadin Belgikan, izan dadin Korsikan, izan dadin Flandrian, izan dadin Euskal Herrian, ematen dute, nola aipatu nahi, elebitasunaren inguruko diskurso bat ekartzen zaigu, eta hori adibidez Korsikan oso hedatua da, elebitasunaren aldeko apostua egiten ari dira, hezkuntzan eta abar, eta Euskal Herrian sektore batean ere bai, eta oso zaila zaigu esplikatzea elebitasun formal hori ez dela egingarria. Eta nik askotan Bruselako adibidea ematen dut. Bruselan neerlandofonoek eskubide guztia dauzkate, arau guztia dauzkate, eta hala ere, beste zerbait gehiago behar da horren atzetik, ez? Orduan uste dut, zure hitzaldi osoak ere argitzen digula ere aspektu horretan. Eta kontutan izan behar dugula, zuek dituzuen zailtasun horietatik, nola ikasi dezakegun guk ere, eta bestalde ere, aipatu duzun derrigortasunarena, ez? Nik beti legeak derrigortzen du, bereziki funtzionarioa, adibidez, Estatu Federalean, lurraldearen arabera, hizkuntza batean edo bestean egingo du, eta zur deituko diozu funtzionario horri, eta bera galdetuko dizu nun zaude. Eta baldin bazaude Linkebeken, neerlanderaz hitz egin behar dizu. Bera behartua da, baina baldin bazaude Liejan hitz egingo dizu frantsesez, ez? Orduan, hor badago ere hemen oso zaila dena ulertaraztea funtzionariak duen betekizuna administratuarekiko. Eta zuen kasuan lurraldearekiko izango da, gure kasuan izango da hizkuntza hautuarekiko. Beraz, askotan administrazioan esaten da ez, euskara derrigortzen zaigu euskara ikaste administrazioan egiteko, baina eske Flandrian eskerrak derrigortzen dela. Eta hori ez da hain errez ulertarazten, hori zuk aipatu duzu ez, diskriminazioa ez da diskriminazioa, noski ez dela. Da eskubide baten bermea ziurtatzeko tresna da. Orduan, uste dut, aspektu horretan ere, behar dugula gehiago pedagogia lan gehiago egin eta esplikatu. Zeren derrigortzen zaiguna da frantsesa. Bai Flandrian edo basa gizartean, ez? Hori zen pixka bat azaldu nahi nuen, eta ez dakitzuko harri daukazun horren inguruan edo eskertuko nuke.
Well, not much, because I think you are right, mainly. Of course, as I told you, we are happy that we have these laws. We are happy that they are there, because I think if we had to make them today, it would be very difficult. Also, I told you something about this language union we have with the Netherlands. I've been part of this story for more than 30 years of my life. I worked together with the Netherlands. I think if we had to make this treaty today, they wouldn't do it anymore. So it dates back to a time where people thought that this was important. For Flanders being, I said we are a majority in Belgium, but of course we are a minority in the Dutch language zone. So we are only 6 million and some, while in the Netherlands there are 17 million. So we, as far as the Dutch language is concerned, Flanders is a minority. So we always wanted to cooperate with the Netherlands, because they had Dutch as an official language, as a normal language, while here it was still French at that time, and we didn't have rights. So we always looked at the Netherlands being our stronger brother that could help us to emancipate. So that's also why we made that international treaty with the Netherlands in 1980. And everybody thought at that moment that was a normal thing to do. It was a good thing to do. But today, if you would say, well, let's make such a treaty, you wouldn't find enough support to do that. Also politically, you wouldn't find enough support to make such a treaty. So we're happy that they exist, these instruments, but the question is, how long will they survive, seeing the globalization and the internationalization? But still they are there, and we have to use them, these instruments, and we have to protect them. Okay, that was it, more or less, because it wasn't really a question. Annie, it's not Annie. Annie is your artist name, so.
Bueno, eskerrik asko, Wilfried, zure hitzaldiagatik oso interesgarria izan da, eta klabe asko eman dizkigu gero Euskal Herrira ekartzeko. Josu, nahi bazu galdera azkar bat, ja denboraz pixka pasagera?
ez da galdera, antolakuntzari galdera bat bakarrik, ez Wilfriedi. Grabatu egin duzue hau, ikusgai izango da, eta nola ikus dezakegu?
Hori da, bai, hurrengo egunetan mezu bat bidaliko dizuegu, baina saio guztiak grabatu ditugu, eta asmoa da datozen egunetan edo Gabonen aurretik behintzat webgunean jartzea saio guztien grabaketak eta hizlariek erabili dituzten PPT-ak edo dokumentuak orokorrean.
Bale, eskerrik asko.
Baina, bueno, hori esan bezala mezu bat bidaliko dizuegu, gaur etorri ezin izan direnek ere horren berri izateko. Eta besterik gabe, eskerrik asko, gaurkoa izan da azkeneko saioa, eta izango dugu elkarren berri aurrerago ere. Ondo segi.
Thank you.
Eskerrik asko. Thank you.
Agur.
Ja.